think the first paper that you presented when I met you in Egypt was on the Syriac women and their historic practices of worship. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. Yes, yes. It was about Eastern women in hymnology in dialogue with the Protestant church. And I found that so powerful because women were active worshippers. They were singing the beautiful songs that Saint Ephraim wrote, for example, and they themselves were active participants within the church, encouraged by Saint Ephraim. And I think that's a beautiful example to reflect on.
Yes, that was a great paper. It's definitely been like one of my favorites that I've ever heard. And so I love whenever I think I appreciate not even just women being brought into the discussion of theology, but also just the historical context. And also you made it just really easy to understand. I think for someone like me who's not theologically trained, sometimes I'll sit there and be like, what are they saying? And so with your paper, I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes sense. Like I can, maybe it was the relatability aspect that helped me to understand it a little better, but it was just so interesting. And so your writing has really helped me to grow in my faith as well. So I'm really thankful for it. You recently wrote an article in Christianity Today called "Today's Arab Women Theologians Have Plenty of Past Exemplars," which beautifully highlights historical role models. And this is actually something that I aim to do on my podcast here and there is to take women of the Bible and find examples of them in modern day life. And so this is something that you have kind of searched to do in your own writing as well. So how did these examples influence your own teaching and ministry?
When I wrote that article, I revisited figures like the desert mothers, for example. We often talk about desert fathers, but we hardly acknowledge the desert mothers. And there were desert ammas, such as Syncletica of Alexandria in Egypt. In my own Middle Eastern context, women like Amma Sarah, Amma Theodora, they lived in the Egyptian, Syrian, and Palestinian deserts in the 4th and 5th centuries.
Mm.
So I also looked at their contributions, how they shaped my teaching and ministry in very practical and personal ways. First of all, when we think about spiritual formation and discipline, I think the Desert Mothers show us that theology can begin sometimes in solitude, in prayer, in the discipline of listening to God. And that's important to, even today, as I relate to my students, to encourage them not only to analyze texts, but to cultivate inner listening, prayer, reflection, because these women teach us that theology isn't merely intellectual, it's spiritual, and we can never do theology without spirituality. It's important to help students to imagine what their daily rhythms were like for these desert mothers, how they handle doubt or loneliness. It invites actually a theology that holds both mind and soul, but also women like Mother Irene in earlier years. I think these examples encourage us to reflect on courage and how sometimes, even when we feel like we are marginalized, we are overlooked as women, that we can be courageous, that we can use the God given talents and skills. We can choose a path where sometimes the prevailing structures or models don't always encourage us to follow God's calling, but because He called us, we can be courageous. And I think that's important to encourage students to reflect on the calling that God has given them and yet be faithful to that calling. Be diligent in the many gifts that God has given us. And sometimes we start working behind the scenes, but that is also important leadership. We can offer our servant hearts to the Lord, and God sees it and God honors us. I think in these examples of historical women, there's a certain creativity. Theology in our context should be expressed in our own languages, in our own ways, with local idioms. We don't need to bring structures from the West, for example, because
Mhm.
theology started in our own context. And that's important to remind students because often we neglect our context. And I think it's important to draw on our Arab Christian heritage. It's
Mhm.
not nostalgic. That's formative theology.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how songs were used as a way to spread the stories of the Bible. I think that something that you mentioned about how we can feel ostracized oftentimes, and the women of the Bible, even though they weren't living out loud in the sense that not all their stories were as recorded, on paper as the other men of the desert, like you said, but they still had their own faith, and they still are important to the faith that we carry on today. And I
Mm,
think that you're right. Like, the tradition that they had should be kept in the way that we practice our
mm,
faith today as
mm,
well. So,
mm,
what a good
mm,
point.
mm.
So, in your upcoming volume, Women in Theological Education in the Middle East, you center the voices of Arab women theologians, like we were just talking about. So, what do you hope global readers will take away from these reflections?
Yes, I'm really excited about this upcoming book because it brings together Arab women theologians from across the Middle East and North Africa, women writing from places like Lebanon, Egypt, Morocco,
Mm,
Jordan, to reflect on faith and theology and life from within their own context, their own lived experiences. And that carries a message because it's seeing theology through the perspective of women whose experiences are often overlooked or misunderstood, not only in global theology, but even sometimes, sadly, within our own churches. So
mm,
these writers bring perspectives formed in conflict places, in refugee communities, in families, in ministries, where faith, although sometimes is fragile, it's also courageous. It's a fierce
mm,
faith, and that's important. So I hope that global readers will actually take away a sense of recognition first and foremost, that Arab women theologians are not silent, that they're not absent, that they exist, that they have a voice, that they have a contribution, that
mm,
they have important perspectives. They've always been there. This is not a new invention. That they can think deeply, that they can write eloquently, that they can teach, that they can live theology with extraordinary courage, and that's very important. I want readers to realize that theology doesn't emerge from the West or from academic institutions with long histories. It rises from prayer rooms, from women
mm.
who interpret the gospel amid daily struggle. Also, I hope that this book will invite listening. When people think about theology from the Middle East, they expect a narrative of crisis, of persecution, of limitation. But these, which is true at times,
Sure.
but these writings offer something more. They offer the creativity of faith. They offer a sense of healing, in a sense, and a sense of
Mm,
flourishing in a hard soil. But also, I hope that this book will encourage readers around the world not only to admire these Arab women theologians, but to engage with them as partners in theological conversation, that
mm.
their reflections are important. They're not footnotes, but they are essential chapters in the story of the global church.
Yes, very true, Grace. Well, first of all, when does the book come out? And second of all, can people buy it on Amazon? Like, where can they get it?
Yeah, so the book actually initially comes out in Arabic and hopefully by the end
Wow.
of December. But then we're hoping to translate it to English, and hopefully that will be accomplished within the first quarter or so within 2026. And yes, I'd love to share ways how we are making it available, and I'd love everyone to read it.
So cool, Grace. I'm so excited for that book to come out, and I'll be looking forward to hear how we can read it ourselves. And as a female scholar yourself, teaching theology in a global context, what unique opportunities and challenges do you encounter in your role?
First of all, I'd like just to highlight that the opportunities are extraordinary. I find it a privilege to get to work with students from across cultures, from the MENA region, the Middle East, and North Africa. And every encounter, there is a personal story, there are questions, and there are hopes. So that's a space where we can learn from one another. It's about God, it's about how God is working in their lives and in the different contexts. Of course, being a woman in that space often allows for a particular kind of connections with students,
Mm,
especially my female students. Uh, they are able to share their struggles, their doubts more openly. And of course, there's a sense of mentorship that naturally grows.
mhm,
Theology is not just something that I teach, but it's something that we live together. And my favorite thing is to really encourage women in their journey because I know how much that means to them. I want to help them to see their potential, to see their
mm.
God given gifts, to be confident in their calling, and to be confident in the many ways that they can bless the church and the academy through their contributions. I think that's also an opportunity for me to help them expand their theological imagination. We can draw on the richness of Arab Christianity from women's narratives, from local stories of faith, and invite students to see theology as something that is alive, that's contextual, that's relational. And it's been incredibly joyous for me to watch these students discover that their voices matter. Their experiences of faith are part of the global conversation, and I think that's beautiful.